So this afternoon, we are joined by Mr. Rhodes Bailey, candidate for House District 75 in Richland County. Mr. Bailey, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you for having me, Patrick. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, our members are always interested to hear about a candidate's background. And so we'd love to hear a little bit about how your personal and professional experiences have shaped your views on the importance of education in South Carolina.
No, great. So I'm running for House District 75. That's part of Richland, and most of it's in the city limits too. But I'd say my personal experiences are kind of two-pronged. One, I have a child that's at Meadowfield. She's in first grade, Meadowfield Elementary School here in Columbia. And I've got another little boy, or well, she's a girl, and then I'll have her brother will be there next year. And my wife and I both came from public schools. I grew up in Florence. She grew up in Johnsonville. So we're strong believers in public school. Two, I have worked in public service law for quite a long time. I'm at the Public Defender's Office. I've practiced law for 13 years, and 10 of those years have been in the Public Defender's Office in Richland County. And, frankly, I see what happens when we don't invest in children and they don't have the resources they need early on. At the Public Defender's Office, we represent people who can't afford lawyers who are charged with committing crimes. And I have seen firsthand, what happens when you've got a young person. I have a lot of clients that are younger and they're in their kind of higher teens, and I've had a few juveniles also. And then I've just had folks that never had anybody that believed them or supported them their whole life that are further along. But to put it bluntly, if we're not building a future for our children, we're going to be building more correctional facilities. If we're not paying for more teachers, we're going to be paying more corrections officers. We spend I think conservatively, we spend $25,000 a year to incarcerate an inmate, and I have had clients and I thought, man, if we would have gotten to him or her earlier on, or somebody had been there to support him and mentor him, or if they had had more resources in their side of the county, I feel like they would have had a better future. So I feel very strongly about it, and I try to help people the most I can, but sometimes it's too late to correct the trajectory of their life once they've already come into the criminal justice system by the time I run into them.
But and you make a lot of points about the importance of an education system that prepares kids for success beyond high school, beyond 12th grade. And that's been a big focus of the General Assembly the last 2 years with the proclaimed education reform bills that made it through the House 2 years ago, the Senate this year. But the two chambers haven't agreed on anything. So there's a likelihood that come January, they will still be looking at this issue of educational reform so that our schools are equipping kids with what they need for the 21st century. So as a member of the General Assembly, what do you consider to be the one, two, possibly even three reform elements that are most important for our school system?
Well, I guess the simplest answer is that we need to address the teacher shortage, and we can do that certainly by hiring more teachers. We need to compensate them sufficiently so that we keep educators. We need to compensate first that we bring in new educators, but also so we can keep veteran educators that are they're absolutely worth keeping with their experience. We need to get more support. I don't want to just say support staff, but other professionals like guidance counselors, nurses, to help with human services issues so that teachers can also teach. And teachers love their kids and they will do a variety of things. I know I've doubled as a social worker, as a public defender. And I know a lot of teachers have to do that sometimes too. But if we can get some other professionals in and properly fund them, then they can do what they were trained to do initially, which is teach, which is, hard enough and difficult enough as it is. Really, Patrick, by accident, when I was just calling voters leading up to the primary, I talked to a lot of educators, but I started running into a couple guidance counselors that had to float from school to school. And I didn't realize that we had such a shortage of guidance counselors now. And I can assume that if it's not just Richland County, it's everywhere.
It is.
Yeah, and I remember having guidance counselors when I was in school, but I was like, gosh, I didn't think about the fact that when I was in elementary school, we had one guidance counselor, and she was there all the time. I mean, she was always, her name was Miss Moser. That's right. I mean, this would have been literally like 30 years ago, but I remember her, very clearly. And, I think a lot of people remember educators and people in education that touched their lives. So one thing is, of course, we need staff, but teachers need more money. They need more boots on the ground. They need more support. And we got to address class size. And I'm not the first person to say we talk about reform. We need to make sure we're not testing the kids and the teachers to death, because part of what makes the learning experience effective is people shape it to the teacher. I mean, to the student. Teachers all have a different style. Different children are reached different ways. And if you're just kind of, if it's the sort of cookie cutter testing thing, you're spending all your time with that. Clearly, it's not really it's going to undermine the effectiveness or what's sort of special about the process. So those are some, those are a few things I would focus on. And here's what I'll finish with on that. I am not an expert, and neither are most of the legislators. Therefore, they should listen to experts and listen to educators, which they did not do with Senate 419, and they did not do in the House. So we need to really do our research and listen to people who understand it.
Well, and you made a lot of points about the importance of stopping the teacher shortage crisis, and that's a big issue for our association and for the children in South Carolina. You mentioned how higher pay and lower class sizes could contribute, and more professionals in other fields in a building. All agreed on those points, but I'd love to dive in a little deeper on the teacher recruitment and retention. You mentioned pay. If you could give us any specifics on what you think the state needs to head toward, and then anything beyond pay that you think would be important for the state to do to attract more teachers to the profession, because our pipeline is shrinking every year.
Okay, right. Well, I'll take a stab at it. I have opinions about it, but there are people that are certainly more knowledgeable. First, first, I know that we only fund, or the state itself pays $6,606 per student a year, or funds us about $606,006. I remember that because somewhere right around there, and that's well below the national average. So I just think we're not really taking it seriously. Here's another thing, we haven't gotten back. My understanding is we haven't gotten back to the funding rates, the pre-2008 financial crisis rates.
Right.
Back in 2008 and 2010, we cut, everything was cut. Department of Education, Department of Mental Health, DSS that protects, children in other ways. Higher ed was cut substantially. Health and Human Services. Look, we're going through the COVID crisis right now, and Health and Human Services really wasn't funded where it needed to be. So what's sad is when I started this campaign, I was always talking about education. That matters to people in my district very much. At the time, we were talking about how we were going to make things better, which I still would work very hard to do. But now we also need to make sure we can protect public education the way it is. And I'm going to get on a slight tangent. The governor's voucher scam is insidious, and it drives me crazy. He took $32 million out of a $48.5 million pot that was discretionary for making sure children return to school safely and teachers return to school safely. And they have backdoored this in. It's a Trojan horse to jumpstart this voucher program, and it's based on national models. It's a special interest group, and I'm so angry about it. I'm so mad. It's so phony. It's misleading. There's the lawsuit pending, and I'm proud to see how I'm interested to see where that goes. But they knew that that our legislature would not pass this kind of thing in regular time. So they're taking advantage of this money, and they're trying to force it through. And it's related a lot to what's going on nationally with the education secretary Betsy DeVos. Because this is a model that they have been ramming through. These people are ideologues, and they want to drain public money from public schools. So I go on that digression to say that a lot of what we have to do now is fight for what we've got now. And let me phase into part two on that, Patrick, while we're talking about what the crisis we're in. Budgets are not going to get budgets are going to continue to get tight, maybe because of the COVID crisis, But the state House this past week refused to pass a budget. So, and a lot of educators know this. So the state Senate passed a budget, a pretty good budget, and it allowed for step increases for teachers. It allowed for some small business relief, like $20 million in business relief, and it allowed for more nurses in schools. So, the Senate did what they had to do. The House refused to vote on it and did a continuing resolution, just said, let's just fund like we did last year. And that's what the governor wanted too. Problem with that is this year's needs are different from last year's needs. I mean, this year is not last year in the middle of a pandemic. And the House just failed on the job. And that is what drove me to run in the first place, was I was so frustrated at watching how dysfunctional the legislature was. And sometimes, I don't know whether it be laziness or apathy, but it really sort of drove me crazy. So I think two of the things that are really on my mind right now about protecting against nefarious forces that want to undermine public education are just people that are, don't care. One, the House budget, but two, this voucher system. And I am so glad to see people fighting them in the courts, because sometimes the legislature doesn't do what it needs to do. And what we end up doing, you have to take certain battles to courts. Now, and I promised myself I wouldn't forget what question you had initially asked me, but I definitely veered away from it.
Oh, you covered several future things I was hoping to get to. We're actually an amicus party against the governor in the law.
Right.
We are hopeful for the outcome. But just to be crystal clear for our members, although I know what the answer to this is going to be, as a member of the General Assembly, if the governor comes before you next year in a state of the state and says pass a voucher plan, I'm assuming you're voting no.
I'm anti-voucher. You're not going to see me I will be unequivocal about it. I don't think, I don't think public money should go into public schools.
Okay. There you go. Earlier, you mentioned your experience as a public defender and with DJJ, and you talked about how you saw that some kids had different resources depending on which side of the county they're in. And that's a huge issue in our state because the General Assembly has an obligation to provide an education to all students. The Supreme Court has said it has to be minimally adequate, which we think is too low of a bar. But the reality is that not every kid is even getting minimally adequate, especially when it comes to state level of support for their education. So as a member of the General Assembly, you've already talked about upping base student cost. But what else do you think is essential to ensure an equitable education for every child in South Carolina, regardless of which side of which county they're in?
Well, minimally adequate is about the least inspiring phrase you can have. Different counties, as you said, different counties, not just even when, within my county, but also different counties and communities have for different needs. And some of them have needs that require more health services or food services or other things. And of course, I think an equitable funding formula makes sense. This is something that I will need to continue to talk to experts about, but it makes sense to have an equitable funding formula. And of course, equitable isn't equal, because it depends where you're at. If you're in one county that's very well funded, giving that person, I'm just going to make up a number. If you give that county $50,000, it's going to be really different from giving another county $50,000. I grew up in Florence, and I grew up in a pretty nice school district. And my mother practiced law in Dillon, and it was, it was very, very poor. And, we frequently would do volunteer work and things like that. And sometimes you don't have to go across party lines to see the disparity. My county is actually fairly, the fairly high median income area. We've got some really great schools, but then just across town, it's a lot rougher. Having a child, I'm always going to make decisions based on what it's like to have, all the other children too. When you see a child in need or you see a child in pain and you're a parent, and you don't have to be a parent, but as a parent, when I see a child in need or in pain, I can't help but think of my little girl and my little boy. Like I can't not think about it. And I'm going to think about those kids. I'm going to think about those kids too when we have votes or we move, or we do something in the legislature. I don't have a fix-all thing, but I think that I think that we've got to consider, and I believe a rising tide raises all ships too. I mean, we can't just take care of our backyard. I mean, we've got to take care of our backyard, but we can do things on a state level to improve the state as a whole. And when we improve education funding, we raise kids that are better educated, healthier, more law-abiding, contribute to society.
Sure. And the Senate actually was looking at revamping, or they were researching the funding formula in January, and then COVID hit. But that's obviously something that hopefully the General Assembly will address moving forward. We've covered a lot of ground, and I want to make sure that we cover what you want to share with members. So is there anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure our members know about you or about your positions?
Oh, that's I appreciate that. I remember I kind of jotted down something earlier. Make sure you talk about the House not passing a budget. Make sure you talk about the vouchers, because I just have very strong opinions on those things. I spent most of my life in public school. As I said, my wife did. I think it's an important part of our community. And, for some families, it makes sense to go to private school, and they may have needs that suits, and, that's certainly fine. But I find, I feel like public school really introduced me to the real world. And I had some wonderful teachers at a very early age. And, a lot of studies show that we benefit from a diversity of experiences and backgrounds. And I think you get that in public school. Katrina is at Meadowfield, and Meadowfield is like 71% below the poverty line. And there are some wonderful teachers there. There are wonderful students there. She absolutely loves it. Let me tell you this, if anybody's listening, I have a tendency to talk a lot. My little girl loves her Meadowfield uniforms, and she has started wearing them for virtual learning. I kid you not. She wears these little, of course, a lot of people have been wearing their sweatpants for so long, but no, she loves it. We've been putting on her Meadowfield outfits. She asked if she could wear them, and she loves them. And we, right. When I was a kid, I probably wouldn't have liked, I don't think I would have liked school uniforms, but my daughter absolutely loves them. And I understand now, having a child and seeing the fact that there are kids with different means in school, I can see why school uniforms are a really great thing.
Sure. Well, we have covered a ton of ground on policy. We appreciate you taking the time to share with our members. And we really appreciate your willingness to serve the state of South Carolina by running for office. We wish you all the best. And if there's anything we can do for you, please let us know.
Thank you so much. Please let me know if you need any more information from me. And Lauren McCauley said to say hello to you. She's a friend of mine.